So last night, both Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn finally ended their near-on 3-year feud when they entered the squared circle, and all of the questions that we wanted answers to were revealed. Can Conor Benn compete at this level? What level is Chris Eubank Jr. at? Have the last few fights been perfect for papering over cracks in Chris Eubank Jr.'s current ability? Are there weight categories in boxing for a reason? And especially for those viewers who would go on Simon Jordan's word, is this fight nothing but a gimmick? Well, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, there is a reason Mr. Turki Al-Sheikh swooped in and stopped Canelo Alvarez from fighting Jake Paul, because when it comes to the Ring Magazine and Riyadh season, gimmick fights are just not an option, and this was no different. What a war from two relentless warriors we got to see last night. And you know what? They say styles make fights, but I would argue that sometimes stories make them even better. And last night, my friends, was an absolute movie. Now, I've just got to be honest with you lot and admit that once the first fight was called off, Conor Benn rocked up to Piers Morgan to prove his innocence, and in doing so told us a grand total of fuck all. Chris took a stoppage loss in the meantime, and even in back-to-back stoppage wins, looked to many like the ferocity, work rate, and the ability to bite down on the gum shield and slug it out had evaporated from his game. I initially wasn't even too sure that this fight was even still needed. But one thing I did know that was, if it was to happen, I wanted it to happen on a fair playing field. And a fair playing field, for me, is £160 with no rehydration clause. Chris missed weight the first time out by 2 ounces. He then went back, weighed back in, and missed it by 5 ounces. Even though initially he had only missed it by 2 ounces, he was fined on the final attempt, which means he had to pay the $500,000 or whatever it was for the 5 ounces, half a pound, to you guys who don't know that he missed weight by. I thought that that was pretty stupid, to be honest. I thought that he should have just been able to pay the lower amount, which was the 2 ounces that he originally missed it by. But what did it prove? Well, it proved to us that Chris Eubank Jr. can no longer really safely make £160. And I know you will have heard Eddie Hearn banging on about the fact, well, he's made it for his last 4 fights and he's even fought as high as super middleweight. But you have to go all the way back to 2019 to when he last even fought at super middleweight. And the last few times it has been evident that Chris Eubank Jr. has outgrown the days of being able to make £160 safely. He's a 168 fighter. I mean, realistically, he's probably more like a 164 fighter, which there isn't a weight category for, but Chris Eubank Jr. is now a 168 fighter, which is kind of crazy, because if you look at the 168-pound division, I mean, don't even look at the division now. Look at the recent sparring footage that George Groves put out of himself and Chris Eubank Jr. back in 2011, and you will see that Chris Eubank Jr. is undersized even for a 168 fighter. So when there is a rehydration clause in a non-title fight, when your guy has already popped dirty and no one can come up with any logical explanation apart from he's a fuckload of eggs, and he's been cleared by people a lot smarter than both me and you, is farcical. Now, I really like Eddie Hearn. In the brief moments I've met him, he's been a really cool, down-to-earth guy, and he most definitely brought the good times back for British boxing. He's a great promoter, and I think that he does a phenomenal job at that. But shame on you, Matchroom Sports, for putting that rehydration clause in the contract. I think in doing so, you showed your hand already that you doubted your guy's ability to be able to beat a heavier Chris Eubank Jr. One that, let's be honest, you were saying was shot to pieces in the build-up for this fight. But that means nothing. The truth is that the fighter's safety is paramount. And by putting that rehydration clause in there, you made sure that it was no longer as safe for Chris Eubank Jr. as it was for your guy Conor Benn. Because I'll put it in a nutshell for you guys. The more dehydrated you are, the more dangerous it is to enter a boxing ring. The more dehydrated you are, the more likely you are to suffer serious injury from trauma to the head. And I know what you're thinking, well hold on, you're hardly a doctor, are you? I don't fucking need to be, neither do you. Anyone that has watched combat sports over the years and understands basic anatomy would know this. And one man who did know this was Chris Eubank Sr. He said that the fight was dangerous, it was not safe, and that time after time he would not be in his son's corner.
Junior, you're smashing an egg against this guy's face. I taught you that. I didn't teach you that. Who taught you that? Did Karen teach you that? Who taught you that? That's disgraceful. I'm gonna stand in your corner. You must be mad. You must be mad. I would never be in your corner. You're a disgrace. You're smashing an egg in someone's face, and then you're trying to justify it. There's no justification for that. There's nothing noble about that.
No, I get it, right? Eubank Senior lives by the Warriors Code, and Eubank Junior has shown that he will do things in the build-up and in the promotion to fights that Eubank Senior wouldn't approve of. But that was kind of the story of this fight, and it's kind of been the story for me of Chris Eubank Jr.'s career, where I've warmed to him the most, and that is Chris Eubank Jr. stepping out of his father's shadow and becoming his own man. Because there was a time when Chris Eubank Jr. for me was one of the more unlikable guys in British boxing. Now I can't get enough of the fella. He's the gift that keeps on giving, and the build up for this fight for me has probably put him close to top spot when it comes to interest from a British fighter.
Frank Warren behind me, been lying and cheating his way through boxing for the last couple decades. Scumbag. Eddie Hearn, Frank Smith, scumbags, you know.
I'm sure the likes of Tyson Fury and AJ will garner a lot more interest if they do come back and eventually fight each other. But as for the moment, actively fighting, I don't think there's anyone that will get the same amount of eyeballs and the same amount of publicity as Chris Eubank Jr. But I can't deny that in the build-up, it was sad to see what was going on with his dad. I completely understand why Chris Eubank Sr. didn't want his son to take that risk. Obviously, tragically, Sebastian Eubank, Chris Eubank Sr.'s oldest son, lost his life. Chris Eubank Jr. spoke about that in the build-up to this fight, and if you put yourself in Chris Eubank Sr.'s situation, you're a dad, you've already lost a son, you do not want to be part of something that you feel is putting your other child at jeopardy. And the rehydration clause in the contract, the fact that Conor Benn had already, whether it was knowingly or unknowingly, been proven that he had cheated in the build-up to this fight, is enough for a parent to think, I don't want my son to take this risk. I've suffered the pain of losing a child, and I am not going to cooperate and facilitate the chance to have that happen again. And by the way, if Chris Eubank Sr. had have worded it in the way that I just have there, maybe he would have had more public support, rather than a lot of the boxing public thinking, come on man, you need to be there. But despite Eubank Jr. having the chance to clap back many occasions at his dad, he stayed classy, a class in that build-up that his dad should have shown, in my opinion. And most importantly, he left the door open to a man that, in my opinion, was wrong. Don't get me wrong, he was right about the weight, about the dangers, about the rehydration clause. But at the end of the day, that is your fucking son. And no matter whether your son is doing things that you agree with or you don't agree with, you be there and you stand by his side, you fight his corner, and you are there to represent the family name.
My own father, a man I idolized for my entire life, he doesn't speak to me. We haven't spoken for years, and he thinks I'm a disgrace. You know, These things are what pain is to me.
And Senior not wanting to do so is truly something that pulled on my heartstrings a little bit in the build-up to this one. So as you can imagine, when this aired, I was absolutely buzzing.
Have a look at this. He's here. And the crowd are going wild. Father and son reunited. Simply the best. And that is the picture of the year so far.
This moment literally sent shivers down my spine. I don't think that it was part of a master plan. Eubank Senior would have turned down plenty of money in the build-up to this fight to appear, to promote throughout. This was clearly an on-the-day decision of, do you know what? My boy is in the biggest fight of his life tonight, and regardless of whether I agree with everything he has done and everything he has said, I am gonna be there for him either way. I was fucking buzzing for it. Because Eubank Jr. has done enough now to warrant making his own decisions, crafting his own path. But when a family lose a member, I believe that that family needs to group together to be there for each other and to support each other in every situation, whether that be a public one or behind closed doors, rather than drifting apart. So to see that last night was such a beautiful moment. Although, was it a beautiful moment for Team Benn? Because here was their reaction.
Nigel and Conor seeing Junior and Senior together. There's the four in shot.
When I said that this was a movie, I was not lying. There was something eerie about watching both Conor and Nigel Benn see the footage of Chris Eubank Jr. turn up. And I'm not going to say that Conor or Nigel Benn looks scared at all, but I think that Adam Booth made a great observation in the Sky Sports commentary that I was watching, and that was that if there are going to be any surprises, if there are going to be anything that could potentially unsettle a fighter or anything that pops up that you're not prepared for, you are best off leaving it until the night rather than the build-up, so that that fighter cannot have one single moment's preparation mentally to get in the mindset and the zone that you need to be when this sort of thing happens. So with no time to adjust, I don't know, I could be wrong, but I just feel like both men were stood there frozen for a moment, and Conor Benn did not look all that pleased. The drama didn't stop there though, because obviously as boxers you are allowed to send one person in to watch your opponent's hands being wrapped. Very famously, the Klitschko brothers used to do it. Whatever one wasn't fighting would go into the opposition changing room and they would watch the hands be wrapped. Therefore, Vitaly Klitschko, I believe, would have watched Tyson Fury's hands be wrapped against Vladimir Klitschko, but you can send any member of the team. Now, who does Conor Benn choose to send? Would he send his dad Nigel? Would he send Tony Sims? Would he send someone else from the training setup? Wrong. He chose to send Chris Eubank Jr.'s arch nemesis, Billy Joe Saunders, backstage to watch the hands being wrapped.
No cheating, lads. No. We want fair rapping, no cheating.
Don't matter what's under.
You're just sitting there. You're just sitting there. You're a nobody, bruv. You're
no
an old
one.
big bouncer.
You're no one.
What are you gonna do?
Calling me a no one.
What are you gonna do?
You're a nobody.
You're a nobody.
No one's
You're
calling
a
me
nobody. You're a nobody. I'll write you off in seconds. Flat nose, big nose. Oh, look at you, the stat of you. Look at you. Look at the stat of you. Do you know you? Do you know when you're outside? You come to me, big boy, and I'll splatter you in seconds. I will see, big boy. You go. We're seeing you.
Billy Joe's got some front in here. I fucking love the fella. But, to be honest, I don't think I'll be too confident going in there against Napa, Chris Eubank Jr.'s manager. Then again, maybe if you're Napa, I don't care whether that's a heavyweight Billy Joe Saunders or not. I think Billy Joe Saunders will have a rollabout on the cobbles with anyone. Nevertheless, that was the build-up done, and now we move on to the fight itself. And I'm hoping the fact that music's playing doesn't take the monetization off this, or YouTube don't take it down, because this is too epic not to show you. These ring walks were a thing of beauty. Both men reliving and letting us have the nostalgia, walking out to their dads.
Boxing Coliseum and the grandest stage of all for the biggest fight of his life.
Now maybe this is favouritism, because I'll admit I wanted Chris Eubank Jr. to win this fight, and it's weird because in terms of the past I way preferred Nigel Benn to Chris Eubank Sr. However, I've got to be honest and say that Chris Eubank Jr.'s ring walk stole the show for me. It sent tingles. It's different. It really does hit different, doesn't it? Now, when the fight gets uploaded, I will do a video where I break it down round by round and I rescore it for you guys. But my general kind of thought was going into the 9th round, I had Chris Eubank Jr. 6-2 up on my scorecards. I think that Chris Eubank Jr. won the first. I then think that Conor Benn came on top and had a really good period in the fight for a couple of rounds. But then, going onwards, I think that Chris Eubank Jr. started to rack up the rounds on the scorecards. I think that the difference in size did start to become evident. I do think it was still a fight that was ebbing and flowing, and Ben had his moments and definitely proved that he could take Eubank's shots and return with his own. Many of these rounds were close and competitive. Many moments where both fighters looked to be emerging on top, just for the other one to pull the wool from under their feet. But for me, the classier work had been done by Chris Eubank Jr. And by the way, the Sky Sports box office commentary, which I was watching, I'm not going to, jump to the gun and really put it on them and say that it was awful, but I did think that their commentary and the way that they were covering the fight really surprised me. They were very pro Conor Benn, which, again, as I say, surprises me, being that Chris Eubank Jr. is the Sky Sports fighter. And maybe they were just watching a different fight to me. Maybe you guys will tell me in the comment section below that I'm wrong and this fight was way closer. I'm not saying it wasn't competitive, but there was one scorecard that was shown, an unofficial scorecard, by the way, that had them level going into the last round, and that is just not how I saw this fight. As I say, I thought Chris took the first, lost a few, then really started to control the fight from the 4th onwards. I thought that Conor Benn rallied back around the halfway mark and maybe tighten things up again, giving him a chance of winning or even drawing if he clean swept those championship rounds. But that's not what happened. Those questions, those assumptions, even from Team Benn and most prominently from Eddie Hearn, that Chris Eubank Jr. was shot and he couldn't stand toe-to-toe and have a real fight anymore, were very much proven to not be true. Because in the championship rounds, Chris Eubank Jr. said, fuck this. If you want to cook, then let's step in to the kitchen. And I will back my punches to have more of a damaging effect on you. And I will back my chin to be able to absorb more than yours can. And it wasn't plain sailing, but ultimately it did. Round 12 was easily one of the best rounds of boxing that I have watched. Both men out on their feet, empty gas tanks, but still just throwing and hoping. But for me, Eubank Jr. was landing the more telling punches. And at one point, I thought he was a fraction from dropping Conor Benn. Eddie Hearn pretty much said he was baffled by the scorecards, how all three judges could be in agreement and score it 116 to 112 in favour of Eubank Jr. But those weren't scorecards that baffled me. I don't think there were scorecards that baffled many of the viewers at home, although I'm really looking forward to hearing your lot's thoughts in the comment section to this video. Could they have scored it 115, 113? Yes. Could they have scored it 116, 112? Yes. Could you have scored it any wider than that to Chris Eubank Jr.? No, I don't think you can. But for once, and this is really not something that regularly happens on this channel, I think that the judges got this one perfectly right. This was an epic fight where both men laid everything on the line. Both men bared their soul, and it was a fight that many will want to see again. But I'm going to give you lot the cold, hard truth of the matter, and this might shock a few of you. Eddie Hearn was right. This isn't the Chris Eubank Jr. of the past. This version of Chris Eubank Jr., in my opinion, is not anywhere that near to the version of Chris Eubank Jr. who went in there with a Billy Joe Saunders, even with a George Groves in defeat, or who recorded really good wins over Avni Yildirim, you know. I think even the Liam Williams win goes a little bit under the radar. This is not that Chris Eubank Jr. I don't think that he has the same engine now. I don't think that he has the same punch power now. And I don't think that he has the same chin now. But even this weight-drained and mind-fucked version of Chris Eubank Jr., yes, I am talking about the £500,000 odd worth of fines that he has had to pay. This version of Chris Eubank Jr. is still too big and too strong for Conor Benn, and that is the cold hard truth of things. And I do think that this is the crowning moment of Eubank Jr.'s career. I mean, the wins over James DeGale and Liam Beefy Smith were both very impressive, but at the same time, we have to contextualise them by saying, were those men anywhere near what we saw of them at their best? And the answer to that was no. And had Eubank Jr.'s career finished without this moment, I don't think that he could wholeheartedly walk away from boxing, regardless of finances, saying that he had achieved what he would be happy with. But after last night, I truly believe that he can. Now, will Conor Benn opt to take the rematch? He may do, but I'm not too sure. Because normally, you will hear the losing fighter immediately call for the rematch, especially in a close and competitive fight like that one was. However, I did think that it was a little bit strange and coincidental that both Eddie Hearn and Conor Benn both spoke about dropping down and fighting for the world title at 147 in their post-fight interviews without even being questioned. That's not to say Ben won't take the rematch, because at the end of the day, money talks, and it was a classic fight where he done himself proud. But I'm just of the opinion that the fight wasn't as close as some people think it was. Let's take it that, without any PEDs in his system, is a prime Conor Benn, and I know that you could say that there's been inactivity and he could be a little bit better in a rematch. But at this moment in time, that's close to a prime Conor Benn, especially when you look at the age of the fighter. And we can all agree, I think, that that is not a prime Chris Eubank Jr. And therefore, I think that the Chris Eubank Jr. of 5 or 6 years ago stops that version of Conor Benn last night. And there's no shame in that, because like we said, there's weight categories in boxing for a reason. Conor Benn definitely got mine and the public's respect in there last night. However, I don't necessarily think that the chin he showed and the strength he showed against the 34-year-old Chris Eubank Jr., who was weight drained, is enough for me to say that he is one of the best fighters at 147, or that he can compete with the best fighters at 147. I do think that there are style matchups that would make for really interesting fights with Conor Benn. Now, this one might be laughed at a little bit. We saw Keith Thurman come back recently. I know it was at the weight division above, but that's a fight that I would probably be interested in seeing. I think it's a fight that Eddie Hearn would jump at making for Conor Benn if he wasn't to go back into the rematch, especially considering Keith Thurman's age and the fact that he's lost. It would almost be going back down the Chris Algieri route. He's mentioned Barrios many of times, and obviously he'll have a little bit of a size advantage over Barrios, a man that once boxed Tank Davis and boxed in weight divisions lower. But if you look at the top of the division, I don't know, man. Conor Benn is not beating a Boots Ennis. Conor Benn is not beating a Ryan Garcia, even a guy that he called out not that long ago. Even with the weight disparity, I don't think that Conor Benn beats Tank Davis, anyone like that. I just think that these guys are all too skillful for Conor Benn, in my opinion, and that raw aggression alone will not get you through against these guys. So I kind of think that after a long saga of ups and downs, this is now maybe back to the drawing board for Conor Benn, although he has just tweeted Chris Eubank Jr. saying this is not over, which leads me to believe that he will take the rematch. And as for Chris, I think he should do that as well. Financially, it will be really, really good for him, but he needs to make sure that there is one speculation in the contract and one only, and that is that this is on Chris Eubank Jr.'s terms. I understand that they might not budge on the weight. They might not let him go above 160. Really, I think that a catch weight of 163, 164 would be fair, because Chris Eubank Jr. won the first fight and therefore should be able to dictate a little bit more. But one thing I know for sure is there is no fucking rehydration clause in the rematch for this one. We saw Chris Eubank Jr. link up with Nick Blackwell earlier on in the week. We have seen tragedies in boxing. Patrick Day, to name one of them. You know, there have been many of them over the past few years, and that is something that we need to avoid at all costs. So a rehydration clause should not be happening. Also, let's stop with all the fucking fines as well, because let's be honest, with the British Boxing Board of Control fining Chris Eubank Jr. 100 grand for smashing an egg on Conor Benn's face, like, that's silly. Where does that go? Where does that go? Possibly in brown envelopes to the likes of old Howard Foster or someone like that, but fuck knows. And there really is only 2 fights in boxing for Eubank Jr. right now, isn't there? Because I don't think that Eubank Jr. is going to go on and win a world title. I think that the 2 fights for Eubank Jr. are the rematch with Conor Benn or the long-awaited, almost mythical at this point grudge match with Billy Joe Saunders, but I just don't see it happening. You look at Billy Joe Saunders last night. Listen, Eubank Jr. might be tight at 160 and might be willing to go up to 168, but the chances of that Billy Joe Saunders being able to make 168 are very, very slim. Remember, these two boxed at middleweight, and that goes to show how well that you can eat off of the Canelo money. And speaking of the main man himself, Saul Canelo Alvarez, he is back out next weekend against William Skull. Will that be all that competitive? Well, I don't know. If Nigel Benn's to be believed, he was getting bashed up in sparring by Conor Benn, so probably not. But you never know. All indications point towards a fight with Terence Bud Crawford, but you just never know. Maybe it will be Canelo against Chris Eubank Jr. next. Maybe that is one last huge payday that Eubank Jr. will take and sail off into the sunset with. Either way, I'm really interested to hear your guys' thoughts on last night's fight. And before I end the video, obviously there may be 1 or 2 of you, there's 20,000 subscribers, so there's bound to be a couple of you who are probably thinking, hold on, why are you suddenly uploading? You haven't uploaded in ages. People, I've been so busy, man, with my fight coming up on Misfits that has been rescheduled but is now happening. There's a ticket link in the bio, by the way. It's in Derby if you want to come and watch me fight on Misfits. It's a good one. Yeah, with that and lots lots of stuff that's been going on in my personal life. I just haven't had the time to be able to put any work into the boxing channel. But hopefully this one does good numbers and it gives me a kick up the arse to start doing more. Much love, people. I will see you all in the next one.